that the audience, when there's a killing, they want to know who did it, who to point the blame to. And once the blame is assigned, they're good. It's over. We have to move on. We've had our resolution. This is the villain. The villain is defeated or crushed or killed or imprisoned, and that's it. It's over. But that's not how the Gospels do it. The Gospels don't just say a whodunit. The Gospels emphasize our ability to have gospel technology, which is our ability to have deep awareness and empathy with the effects of violence and what it does to society, what it does to the person who's victimized, what it does to the people around them. And the gospel is what allows us to have that deep empathy to resolve the matter and to realize that we all participate in the kind of killing behavior by our attitudes. Today, we're back for another discussion on our program. I'm David Gornoski here with Surit Dasgupta. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing fine, brother. How are you?
Good. And we have a topic that I think will help people and help edify research, understanding, which is exploring how art, particularly the work of David Lynch and the television show Twin Peaks, how that can give us some insights and parallels into some of the things that we talk about on an anthropological level. Now, the reason why I invited you on, you sent me a video about this television show Twin Peaks. Is something I've enjoyed, Twin Peaks, over the years. And this was some fan trying, there's 1,000 different fan videos about what Twin Peaks means. So this is just one of many, but this one struck a chord with people. It got over close to 3 million views on YouTube. So it was a 5-hour thing. And I watched it, and it's almost longer than the TV show itself, trying to comment on it. But, the young man that put it together put a lot of work into it. People were very impressed by his editing skills. And I think his channel is called Twin Perfect. He has other analysis films. And of course, these things you have to take with a grain of salt. And David Lynch is notoriously snobbish about entertaining anybody's theories about his work, at least publicly. And so it's one of those things that, it kind of goes against the spirit of his intentions of his art to publicly try to explain it in a clear and a kind of holistic theory. But nevertheless, this video put some points together that I thought were worth discussing in light of how similar they are to the way in which we talk about the gospel technology and the biblical text informing current events today. Many people read the Bible with a kind of flat plot level analysis. And I think that's the first way to look at it. The people read the Bible and they say, who's the good guy? Who's the bad guy? And the good guy is God and anybody that's obeying God and the stories they read. And the bad guy is the people who are disobedient or whatever. And you're supposed to just basically tell me who to say praises to. Okay, it's this good guy. Okay, I say praises to him, and that's it. That's not really, that's probably how a lot of people approach a lot of art when they watch a show like Twin Peaks when it first aired on CBS. A lot of people probably followed along for the plot level analysis, the plot level experience of, wow, this is a quirky, bizarre, dreamlike show with genre bending. It's not, Twin Peaks is neither comedic. It's got comedy in it. It's got soap opera in it. It's got murder mystery in it. It's got a sitcom feel, like a, cheesy comedy of family. And when you watch it, it surely does feel like a hybrid of all three of those things. And most people just want to leave their experience at the plot level of things. But as this guy in this video, Twin Perfect, talks about, there's a lot more going on with this. His theory is that David Lynch was making Twin Peaks as a means of commenting on how imbalanced TV had become, that TV had lost its potential along the way, that it was a little, it was like a kind of a weaker form of cinema as a medium, and that it still had been derelict in its ability to fulfill the promise of its smaller view that cinema, was still superior to. It had failed to live up to even its smaller potential. And he felt like it was, there was what David Lynch calls, there's a spirit in the air. And the spirit of the air is kind of the atmosphere of the culture, and the television both creates it and also reflects it in a kind of symbiosis. And that spirit of the air was negative. And he was concerned about people at the time that programs were going on in the 80s and 90s, that the programs had cheapened violence, and that everybody wanted to see the murder mystery of a story completed within 30 minutes. And they wanted to know who killed him, and that was it. And David Lynch didn't want to do that. And so the whole idea behind Twin Peaks about finding who is Laura Palmer and who killed Laura Palmer, the whole idea behind keeping that mystery alive is he wanted to really focus in on the suffering that such a murder really does create. He wanted to really hone in on the little micro effects, the micro disturbances and traumas that affect people all over a community because of a horrific thing like the death of a person. And so he makes this show as a kind of like a meta antidote to the failure of TV, trying to help the audience recover the balance of being able to appreciate good in the world without being so cynical that they want their whodunit solved in 30 minutes, and they want what David Lynch is very against, which is closure. They want everything completed, finalized, what have you. Now, this closure, sir, I think you jump in here. I'm just kind of setting the table here, but this closure is similar to what Rene Girard talks about with catharsis, that they want to have a kind of catharsis that is a resolution to everything. Everything is wrapped up, right? And I think it's interesting that the Twin Peaks show fails to accomplish its mission, because as the story goes, the audience was complaining that they were dragging it on over and over again, episode after episode, into the second season, still not answering who killed Laura Palmer. And the producers, the studio said, you've got to say who did it. So they did it. And then David Lynch was furious and he left the show, and it became taken over by other directors and writers who kind of ruined the quality of the show in season 2. And then he tried to make a movie which bombed at the box office, and that was kind of buried it until it was resurrected in Showtime. But it was a whole different experience by then in the Twin Peaks season 3 return. But the general gist of it that I'm trying to explain quickly for our audience, if they've never heard about Twin Peaks, or maybe they have and they're unfamiliar with some of the details, is that he was concerned about how the audience wants closure, and that need for closure ends up ruining the audience's ability to deeply have empathy with the idea of human suffering. And I thought that's so interesting, because that is literally the scapegoat mechanism in a literary or artistic medium being depicted there. That the audience, when there's a killing, they want to know who did it, who to point the blame to. And once the blame is assigned, they're good. It's over. We have to move on. We've had our resolution. This is the villain. The villain is defeated or crushed or killed or imprisoned, and that's it. It's over. But that's not how the Gospels do it. The Gospels don't just say a whodunit. The Gospels emphasize our ability to have gospel technology, which is our ability to have deep awareness and empathy with the effects of violence and what it does to society, what it does to the person who's victimized, what it does to the people around them. And the gospel is what allows us to have that deep empathy to resolve the matter and to realize that we all participate in the kind of killing behavior by our attitudes, by our participation in these mythological structures of violence. So in that sense, TV was a structure of violence with mythology, and it was obscuring the reality of violence. And Twin Peaks was an attempt to reveal that, but it failed because the audience overwhelmed it and kind of expelled the artist's intention behind the project and hijacked the project, made it what it wanted to do, which is cheapening by solving the crime. Apparently David Lynch wanted I don't know how he was going to do it if he had his way. Would he still be making seasons of Twin Peaks all this time, you think, uninterrupted? If he got
It's
his way?
hard to say. Yeah, it's hard to tell because the unpredictability of Lynch, we never know what he's going to come up with. But yeah, you're right about the closure thing. And I think he has a problem with closure for the same reason he has a problem with the cheapening of violence that you mentioned, right? So the reason he really has, I think, like, as an anthropologist, what we can really notice is that the reason he has a problem with the closure in the mainstream sense, right? Like how in movies and in detective novels we tend to close the plot is a very, like you rightly pointed out, the crowd, like in this case the audience is looking for who to place the blame on, so the closure is basically who placing the blame on somebody and then eliminating that person, that bad guy, right? And I think that's also the same reason why he has a problem with the cheapening of violence, is that unconscious Christ hauntedness that goes on in a person's mind, as a result of the culture that he's being brought up in. So I think Lynch, even though I don't think he even remotely proclaims himself to be a Christian, at least in the general accepted sense of that word, but I think he is deeply uh, he's unconsciously deeply affected by the cheapening of violence, in the sense that suffering should not be cheapened, right? When a person feels a lot of pain, he should not trivialize it. And that's what Twin Peaks as you said, was the antidote towards. And but there's a problem with his way of closure as well. We can get into that if you want to.
Well, but first of all, it's important to note that his Twin Peaks fails to accomplish its mission because he's overwhelmed by other pressures and he surrenders and allows the show to take on the very form of everything that he had been trying to reveal from within, which is it takes on the form of a show that solves the murder and the audience is ready to literally move on from Laura and find out something else that's interesting. So you think about it from a human level. Why do human beings, why are they trying? Growing up, I remember there were people that would have on shows sometimes when I was younger, and they would have programs on. I'd go to somebody's house or something, and they'd watch these shows about murder mystery stuff and who killed this person and all this stuff. And I thought Unsolved Mysteries was an actual kind of charming version of that, but some of those other shows that were devoid of the strange mystery vibe of Unsolved Mysteries, they were just more about the bleak cold case files and all these shows that came on. I found those things to be very disturbing. The energy vibe in the room changed. Now, some people seem to be so fascinated by it, and I'm not saying that made me something special or whatever, but for whatever reason, I just couldn't get into this vibe of detaching myself from the utter horror of the trauma that some of these victims had gone through. You know, you look at the murder scene, you see blood spilled everywhere and all these horrible pictures and images of, you know, traumas and bruises, and they're just, you know, who did it and how do we capture this murder and all these things. And to me, it's just, I'm like, how is this a form of casual entertainment? This is disgusting. Like, this is so sad and so this is just so horrific. It's so evil. Why is this something that can be packaged as a program? And people can eat popcorn while we watch this. I can't. I don't like that. You know. And I didn't sit. It didn't sit well with me. But that that vibe is still going on even to this day. Now, you said what was it that you wanted to add to the mix of what you were seeing with the show?
Yeah, I mean, regarding what you said right now, I would just want to mention that David Lynch was definitely aware of that cheapening of like like using a trauma of a person, of a victim, as a plot device, and then moving on, like other TV shows or document or novels or other forms of media would do. They would move on from the trauma, right, effortlessly. Like in the next scene, it's something else entirely is happening, that has no relation to the tragedy, the murder, or whatever it is, the tragedy that had occurred. But in throughout the Twin Peaks series, the specter of Laura Palmer, haunts everyone in the town. Everybody's lives are changed. She keeps showing up in dreams and visions, and that's David Lynch's way of telling us that trauma is never easily forgotten, that it changes a person's entire life. Even the FBI agent Dale Cooper, who is from out of town, he comes to be very, as he investigates the murder, he grows more and more close to this dead person, right? Now, yeah, about the resolution, about the way David Lynch resolves his movies, I don't even think he himself would even call it a resolution. But his plots, his narratives are very circular, right? Because you can see this in The Lost Highway as well, where the movie basically ends where it started, right? So it's the last scene of Twin Peaks is very similar to the first scene of Twin Peaks, right? So it's like the cyclical narrative,
Yeah.
so which is very reminiscent of Eastern mysticism, and how they would retell their mythologies or the meaning of life, how they would explain the meaning of life, right?
Yeah.
uh, like if you talk to many Eastern people, they would say that the world has always been existing, that the world really doesn't have a beginning and an ending. So you can sort of see how Lynch is influenced by this near Eastern mysticism. He is a very publicly a devoted practitioner of transcendental meditation, and he also is very inform sorry, he is also very knowledgeable in this thing called twilight language, which is related to the mysticism of India, and the idea that dreams and visions are a language unto their own, right? You can interpret the world, and all of the all of the things that you're seeing from a conscious perspective, you can interpret that through a dream conscious state of mind. And Lynch was very much leaning into that. He tapped into that a lot. That is why there's this weirdness in his movies. His movies are not conventional. You can't exactly grab a popcorn and eat, watch his movies, because oftentimes these grotesque graphical scenes would show up on screen, like a deformed figure from out of the blue or something, that would shock you. Like, and he would not give any explanation as to why that happened. He would refuse.
Or
He's
a
very tight-lipped.
or a 3 minute scene of someone sweeping up the floor. He'll do that too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, he's like the video that you mentioned, and that video is very recommended, because there's a lot of uh you know uh legitimate sources that are being cited there. And David Lynch believed that movies are a type of dreams which we, the audience, are entering into. And the Twin Peaks characters are, there are sometimes they would, recoil in some with these blinding flashes of lights on their faces, which that analysis suggested that these characters were recoiling and or reacting to being made aware that they were television characters or something akin to that, right? Like
Yeah, it has
we are
that kind of
watching.
Truman Show vibe to the show,
Yeah, yeah,
that these characters are becoming increasingly aware of the fact that they exist solely as television characters in somebody else's dream, which is the audience's dream and the director's dream, and that they are, and that's one of the things that makes it interesting. It's almost like a video game, like a psychic video game he was creating, where the audience is, and the guy that breaks down the show, I mean, it's just, some of it's his interpretation, but I think some of it is probably pretty right on in terms of some of the
well,
techniques that are being used. But
yeah.
he just go
Just
ahead.
before you go on, I would like to mention where he gets that from, because again, like this, like you mentioned, the Truman Show kind of element.
Yeah,
That's also linked, connected to the idea you see in the Matrix movies and all of these other movies, that we're all living in a simulation kind of thing, right? Where everything is Maya. That's the
yeah,
Indian Sanskrit word for illusion. So everything is an illusion. We're all living in a simulation,
yeah.
and that's the result of having this very, you know dialectical view of good and evil being balanced with one another, right? So you have good and evil, you don't have the elimination of evil. uh it's more nuanced. I know it's more nuanced than just that, but Lynch positions his darkness with good, and at least he attempts to do that very perfectly. But the reason his narratives are very circular is that that's really a self-defeating thing, really, because you can't really balance good with evil. You can shine a light on it, or you can, try to eliminate it, but you can't really balance the two things, because one is natural, the other thing is not. And that's the reason why his resolution, even though he is right in pointing out the problems in media and how we tell stories, unfortunately he himself falls short because of that idea of balancing good with evil. Like that's a
But there is
self-defeating
a
thing.
kind of dualism that is in traditional Christianity too. It's not a foolish. It may be errors in some way, but there's a sense that, people, the Calvinists call Satan God's devil. That in sense that God is using him sovereignly to create his purposes and his divine will, and it's this overcoming of uh, of of the depravity of man that God exercises in salvation, for his own perfect design. And we don't have a way to question that. And then outside of Calvinism and the broader church, there's various different kind of dualistic type Christian notions that, there's a kind of, that history. I mean, even, Rene Girard, who we like, he says that history is a test and mankind is failing it. So one could see that test as a form of dealing with the evil of mankind and the fallenness of creation itself, which is not just evil moral behavior, but also tornadoes flying into children and destroying them, and all kinds of horrible afflictions and diseases and random freak accidents like a piano falling on someone's head while they're walking down the street of New York City. All of those things are part of the theodicy concept of why do bad things happen. And there's a Christian kind of Stoic tradition that kind of laces through all the different denominations, in my opinion, to some degree or another, that it
Yes.
embraces a kind of, not that evil is good, but that evil is somehow not necessarily even necessary, but it is a sufficient way of allowing us to overcome the struggles of the flesh and the devil and the randomness of evil, of things going wrong. of bad things.
Yes.
So in some sense,
Mhm.
there's a redemptive element to what he's tapping into, and even the Eastern folks are tapping into. Although I don't, like you said, I don't think they have a way of resolving how it gets resolved, right? Because they don't respect personhood they don't. It's not that they don't respect it, but they don't orient it to true personhood.
Well, there is actually an irony here in the sense that when I point out that David Lynch falls short of the resolution,
Yeah,
I will still admit that he gets some things. I will still admit that he gets certain things right that even mainstream, like, fundamental kind of Christians fall woefully short of. For example, uh, like for example, this idea that Christians have that the devil is somewhat equal to God, right? I don't think Lynch has that exact kind of idea. I don't think Lynch scapegoats evil and embodies it into something. He sort of like he has a more, I think, accurate view of evil in the sense that evil is the result of human beings. Evil is not something that is ontologically coming
yeah.
out of from ex nihilo. You know what I'm
I
saying?
think he does say in one interview it's the absence of good or something, which is a Christian concept, right? Like
Yeah,
the evil.
that's
Yeah,
what I'm saying.
yeah,
Yeah, he does. He gets this spot on in my view, and the reason why this is so important, Christians they tend to make an embodiment of evil, and that's like a scapegoating process, right? So when they do that, they create a kind of blueprint for scapegoating. You get what I'm saying?
yeah,
So when they create an embodiment of evil, like devil, the personification of a devil, or like
yeah,
who is someone equal to God in power, in omniscience, and all of
yeah,
that, they tend to create a blueprint by which they can scapegoat another person. And that's why, that's why we have these problems in media, in forms of entertainment, of
yeah,
how bad guy and good guy conflicts tend to end with a with the elimination with an elimination of the scapegoat, where they tend to portray villains as irredeemable, right? The villain is completely without salvation, right? There is no hope for the evil villain, who is like a demon. So sometimes, most of the times, portrayed caricaturously, like a Bond villain, you would say, like
yeah.
a caricature of a human being would actually be. So Lynch rightfully saw that problem.
Yeah, that's why he makes Laura Palmer the quintessential victim. Has got a lot of problems. She's got a lot of flaws too, you know. So she's not just a saint, and she's not, she's got balanced depictions in the story. But um, one of the things that you see with his story is that I want to go back to this notion that people, the audience, that what I'm more interested in this discussion, we can, and we've done both, talking about what his art means, but also the way in which his art was received. That's the anthropological part, right? How do human beings in our culture deal with this story being presented to them? And it's something to the effect of, he was trying to make a show that kind of reveals the scapegoat mechanism. Unconsciously, he was doing this, but the audience didn't want to see that. And that's kind of like what I've said before about how, Christianity is turning on the lights in the middle of your favorite movie. Not to say that Christianity only works in that way. No, Christianity can let you have the dream experience of, David Lynch says that, to watch a movie is a very precarious, delicate thing to get into it. It has to be a big screen like cinema. It has to be quiet. You can imagine him yelling at people in the movie theaters when he's trying to hear, preparing for the movie. Be quiet, please. Quiet.
Oh, he hates it when we watch movies on smartphones
Yeah.
and small
A lot
screen,
of those film directors of his time agree with that. I think that's true. It changes the entire experience.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
that's
Martin
definitely
Scorsese says
true.
the same thing, right? But he wants it quiet. and he wants a certain experience so that you can let yourself go, and then you suspend your disbelief and you become part of the show. And there is Christianity is okay, goes into that world, but at the same time, it's going to also turn on the lights to the way in which we like to tell stories and the way in which we like to consume stories. Because that's one of the things that, the guy that analyzes Twin Peaks in this video that we're talking to keeps going back to, is this idea of consumable violence. And that's, to me, is a very analog point to mythic violence, right? Mythic violence is violence that we can consume. Oh, we put millions of people in prison. Well, we do that because they do drugs. Oh, we can consume that. That's okay. They did the wrong, they made a bad choice. We lock them up. We can sanction and kill people. Oh, their dictator is really evil. Oh, but there's a lot of other dictators that are evil that we give money to. Oh, shut up, shut up. Consumable violence, right? We want to eat. We want to be able to consume these violence things that are happening all around us. And the audience rejects that feeling of not having an answer as to who killed Laura Palmer, because the longer it persists, the more it indicts them. See? They can't handle the tension. And that's what the gospel does, right? The gospel does not say, well, it's often been used to say, oh, these people killed Jesus in history. But that's actually not what the gospel does. The gospel is a reflection of looking at ourselves and what we would have done and what we do in different ways, in various ways all throughout history, of trying to discharge guilt and blame onto someone else. We do this all the time. This is our psychological, social means of dealing with ourselves, getting along with ourselves. We want to discharge it. So it makes sense from an anthropological standpoint that even though our society is Christ-haunted, we're not fully Christ in any way, Christ receptive, because we don't want to handle a piece of art that we get to slip into and become one with in the dream, in which once you become a part of the story by participating in the dream, you could be blamed too. And in fact, some people would suggest, Lynch is trying to suggest, that it's the TV audience's demand for blood that requires Laura Palmer to die in the character in the story. That she was created as a character to die so that the audience would have the opportunity to see what they have become and what they want and who they are. It's very interesting. I think in a lot of ways, this metafiction of the story, which is an indictment on television media and also the culture that produces it, specifically, he also has a big issue with World War II and the atom bomb, which is very interesting to things that I've talked about how the atom bomb is the beginning of the ascension of scientism and moral, pseudo-Gnosticism being fully entrenched in the Western mind and enshrined into kind of the holy of holy status of power and meaning in our culture. And it's the kind of the founding moment of the era that we're living in and about to potentially move out of in some ways, as these things. It is interesting, by the way, that we're mediating the same issues on the way out of this post-World War II myth. There's a hunt for who the Hitler is. Is it Putin? Is it Trump? You see what I mean? Putin says it's the Ukrainian Nazis. And then people are pointing fingers at China. Who killed Laura Palmer? Is it China? Is it Russia? Is it Putin? Right. Is it Trump? You see what I mean? Is it Biden? Is it, so we're still looking for our who's going to be the Hitler killer. And that's coming at the end of this. It's coming at the end of this post-World War II mythic era that we've lived under. As it's starting to unravel, those same plot lines are stirring up that started at the beginning of it.
Right. It's the story of Twin Peaks. I would personally compare it to the story of the Gadarene demoniac, where Laura Palmer is the demonic possessed spirit, the individual over there, and the entire town was like in this stupor of like, okay, we can, like, she was having these problems, like in that movie she was having these problems. There were two personalities, and the reason why she had two personalities is because the very nature of the environment around her, right? That she had to act in a certain way towards certain people, and to the other seedy underbelly of that town she had to act in another way. So that's why she was this schizophrenic symptom of hers was an indication that she was kind of like the demoniac of the Gadarenes, that is
Yeah.
Twin Peaks. And you can expand that and apply it to the real world. Like you mentioned, the entire world is Twin Peaks, and Laura Palmer haunts us like, Christ haunts us like Laura Palmer haunts us, right? Like, we
Yeah.
can't let it go. But we, like, just like Twin Peaks, we are not ready to admit our own guilt in her death and murder.
So
That's why this,
we're looking for further murder mysteries to solve,
right,
which is what we
right,
see with all these wars and conflicts and hatreds of this group or that group, protests about hating this group or that group. All of it's looking for the next who killed Laura Palmer moment, because we don't want to deal
right.
with the real elephant in the room. One quote that the guy that did this Twin Perfect YouTube channel, one quote he said, I wrote it down because it encapsulates what we talk about with the gospel. And he's summarizing David Lynch's ideas, which again, I think are pretty accurate to what he would say. He says, evil cannot be destroyed. It can only be beaten by light exposing it. Now, this is something that's very Christian. And this is something, one of the hardest things I've had in trying to be able to convince and help the public understand this, in my opinion, is this very issue. Is there's always this desire to destroy evil by killing it. Like that's what you see with the right. The right wing says, we cannot play by the rules. We must imprison our leftist enemies. We must outlaw their ideas. We must banish their speech. We must, create criminal investigations of all their people. We must spy on them. We must surveil them. We must use a powerful executive branch to wield it against the bureaucracy and destroy the evil infections of our society. They all say that because they believe evil can be destroyed. But in the way in which the Bible situates reality, Christ kind of makes it clear in the same way, evil cannot be destroyed in the sense that we think of destroying it by beating it. When Peter says, hey, don't tell me you're going to go to the cross, he says, get behind me, accuser. You do not know the things of man. He did not like Peter's non-acceptance that, wait a second, I thought you were going to destroy the evil. Rome is evil. The corrupt leaders are evil. You've got to destroy it. You're the man. You're the king. You're the hero. You're the chosen one. You're the one we've been looking for. Go ahead and give me closure, right? Peter wants closure, just like the audience watching Twin Peaks wanted closure. But Jesus doesn't give that kind of closure. He doesn't give that kind of sacrificial closure of catharsis. He doesn't, because that wouldn't destroy the evil. The only thing he can do, as the way in which God seems to have created reality, is that you can beat evil by exposing it to the light. That's what the cross does. It exposes, he's like a detective in some sense. The cross is like a clue to unlocks the meaning of history, right? It's like an artist comes in and tells this beautiful meta story that we're all in a part of, and it reveals this mystery. That's why to the church's credit, none of the churches have ever really most of them have never really solidified on an official dogma when it comes to the atonement. It's always been left for a little bit of mystery, because that's the art. That's the signature art move, that kind of the artistic motif that unlocks everything in the whole story, right? And maybe in that way, David Lynch reflects a little bit of God in the sense that he doesn't like to give away his art so easy on the nose. He wants you to think about it and wrestle with it, which would make sense if the Bible is mostly about the story of Israel, which means to wrestle with God. You would think that maybe the artist is inviting you to wrestle with these things and not give you a plain meaning that wouldn't really solve the problem. So, evil cannot be destroyed. It can only be beaten by light exposing it. The light of the cross exposes the evil of Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire eventually is destroyed by that exposure to light that it did not have before. In the same way, so many different evils around the world, slavery, child trafficking, all kinds of different evils are subsequently in different periods of time in history exposed by shining a light to it. It reveals that we have to stop doing this. We cannot allow this to continue. And we make changes situationally, culturally, that make those things go away. Like I've said before, millions of people want a scapegoat Donald Trump for all the sins of the world. They're making a movie called The Apprentice, which is going to try to help, that same mythic desire to paint him as evil incarnate. But even that, how many of those people that hate Trump would want to have him literally crucified or executed in any violent way in the public? How many of them? Not a lot, The numbers would start to peel off radically so. The people that would want to participate in actually, well, yes, let's go ahead and have a crucifixion of Donald Trump on Times Square or something. You know what I mean? Like, that's not something that the left, as vicious as they hate Trump, a lot of them wouldn't want to go through with seeing that. They would turn their eyes, they would avert their gaze. So the idea that history hasn't changed since Christ laid on the cross is absolutely ridiculous. It's absolutely changed, but it changes in a cyclical pattern. It's a circular pattern of cycle. So that's the thing, sir, that the East is right about. It is cyclical. Things do repeat, but they don't repeat in the same way. They kind of go in a certain way, an upwards direction, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I remember one of the current great novelists, Eugene Vodolazkin, also made this same case, where he reconciled the Eastern view of history with the linear view of history. So in the sense, like, he categorized it as, conceptualized it as, spiral, like
Yeah.
it's an ascendant, spiraling ascendant into
Yeah.
into heaven. So yeah, that's basically yeah, I believe that's true. And you're also correct about the shining a light on evil part. It's so important because it really depends on how we perceive evil. A lot of us, Christians, we perceive evil as something that is inherently wrong about a certain individual. That's why we're always looking out for the next Hitler, who's the next Hitler, because we perceive Hitler as this kind of, incarnation of devil or something, like, as if that's possible.
Yeah.
But like, that's not possible, because the devil has not the same powers that God has. Uh, so we treat Hitler as a kind of incarnation of evil, and therefore, because we think like that, we also keep on, searching for the return of, like the return, messianic return of the incarnation of evil. It's a very inverted, gospel view, if you think about it, because the gospel says that Christ will return. He will return and establish his kingdom on earth. But we also think the same about evil as well. We think that evil will also return in the form of the next Hitler or whatever. Therefore, we Christians must be, militarily equipped to wipe out entire groups of people or individuals like Trump, as you say, as you mentioned. So that's why we need to rethink what the concept of evil.
Yeah. Yeah. And in a similar vein, the same channel, Twin Perfect, also did an analysis on David Lynch's movie Mulholland Drive, which is one of the most famous things he ever did, and a highly celebrated film by film critics and so forth. His premise of that film is that it's dealing with the casting couch issue, with people being exploited in Hollywood. And I think there's a lot of elements that suggest that issue is very much a part of Mulholland Drive. If you watch it,
Yeah.
it's pretty explicit in some cases. But that's another example of getting to the line of exposing it. But of course, he couldn't, right? Because in order for him to get celebrated at Hollywood and to get it funded and financed and distributed, he had to play the game and encode it so much that I guess it could fly under the radar without really upsetting the apple cart of evil that persists in Hollywood to this day. So he gets close to naming the evil, but he can't fully expose it. And of course, he does what he can as an artist. Like you said, it reminds me of a lot of what the Eastern philosophers and religionists did in history. which is, Eastern religions were really good at exposing evil of sacrifice and violence, but they couldn't situate it as to a way to actually like overcome it. What I'm saying is, you look at the Jains, right? They're so against evil, they don't want to step on an ant, right? Is that right? Or is it a cricket?
Yeah.
They don't want to step on an ant, right? Because that is
Yeah.
committing violence, right? So in some sense, you say, "My God, we don't need Christianity." That's the Western thinking, right? Always trying to get away from Christianity. We don't need Christianity. Look at the Jains; they figured out such a kindness towards the fellow beings. Even an ant has sacredness and therefore should not be stepped on. My God, why do we need the Jesus story to help us become kind to one another? And then your answer would be, as someone who understands James, what would you say?
Well, I mean, that's like, I mean, the intention is right in the sense that, yes, we shouldn't trample on nature. We shouldn't abuse nature. And part of nature is God's creations. Even the tiny ant is a part of the ecosystem, right? It keeps the ecosystem balanced. But at the same time, it, like this elimination of desire that the Jains and the Buddhists share is very it tends to end up in a place where personhood, the very notion of personhood ceases to exist. And that's why I think Christ got it right, in the sense that in the idea that each of us, even as individuals, are uniquely made in the image of God. And what that means is we with all of our quirks and characteristics, our mannerisms and our dreams and visions, all of these things, they formulate like who we are as human persons, right? So we might share the same human nature with one another, but we are distinct in the sense that we are different persons, and no person is the same as another. There is no such thing as an identical person. So Christ preserves that when he says, when he shows, when in John chapter 3 verse 16, he says, God died for you on the cross. But that he was describing the length, the self-sacrificial length that God would go to preserve our personhood, right?
Yeah.
And so that is a very intrinsic part of our humanity. So unfortunately, uh, that the is not there in among the Jains, where they would end up in a case of, again, coming back to David Lynch, in a case, in a state of non-existent, right, where everything ceases to be. And like David Lynch, you can also see this in Twin Peaks, especially the last season, where everything good and evil and everything, like the entirety of existence, is derived from the sea of non-existent, right? Non-existence. That's what that place is called. Like the where he conceives it as a sea because it is without shape and form, right? It melts and forms into wherever the wind takes it will go. Like it's formless.
Why do you
So
think that
that's
the
what.
height of it? Why do you think the height of the Eastern wisdom traditions ends up situating the end of history as non-existence? Why?
Well, that's
Anthropologically, why
where
do you think that the
anthropologically.
Taoism, Buddhism, Hinduism, if I'm Jainism, all these different ones all kind of end up there? Why do they end up in a sea of non-existence anthropologically?
Well, it's because anthropologically they have the Buddhists have a very weird view of desire. They don't have a view that makes a distinction between good desires and bad desires.
Yeah.
Like they want to the very concept of desire itself is inherently bad for us. So
So
that's
all of these
why.
religions basically recognize the evil of humanity and they just want to obliterate
Yes.
existence as the
Well,
solution.
that's why David Lynch is such a great, illustration. Like his works are such great illustrations of this thing. That's why his narratives end up in a circular state. Is because uh, this 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 recognition that death, evil is something that is already a natural part of our existence. It's not a natural part of our existence. Death is not something that is inherently natural, from an Edenic perspective, right? Death is the effect of the fall. So
Yeah.
the effect of the fall, like it's the death is not something natural. It is something to be something that we should, recoil at. And that's again where David Lynch gets it right. He gets it right that we should be horrified by people dying and suffering. That's why he has a problem with the cheapening of death, right? But again, like his problems are very circular. Like his problem and
And
solution.
let's be fair. He's more influenced by Christianity than any Eastern religion, even though he accepted transcendental
Well,
meditation.
like the very notion that he is
Yeah,
horrified by death, like that's an
yeah,
indication. Like, why would you be horrified by the cheapening of death?
yeah,
Give me one good stand. Why? I mean,
yeah,
if evil and bad, good should be balanced. Like evil is already a natural part of our existence. Like I don't see any problem in the
yeah.
cheapening of death.
Yeah.
Right? That's what the ancient
And
societies did.
I think
They,
that's an example of how philosophy and Eastern religion go up to the point of exposing evil, but can't go all the way. Just like Mulholland Drive reveals this wicked, horrible thing that's happening in Hollywood, but doesn't reveal it apparently because nobody got it.
yeah.
The show continued in terms of it's still continuing. We still don't know to what extent people have been used and abused to maintain this charade of the bliss of Hollywood. And he pointed to it, but he couldn't fully, for whatever reason. I don't know. And it at the same time, there is a kind of to balance out what I'm saying in criticism. There's a kind of Christian sense of if he did name names, does that not create a kind of false sense of closure? Right. Well, okay, it's just like what happened. Right. Once Harvey, we won't say the full name. Once Harvey was named, okay, that discharged closure. We found out who killed Laura Palmer, so to speak, and we moved on, right? See what I mean? What?
Well, that's why, like, thank God you brought up Mulholland Drive because that's another brilliant, uh, analogy of the problem that we have in modern society with scapegoating, right? So at one point, you come across this stumbling hitman. Like maybe he's the guy who killed the the main character of that movie, right? The aspiring actress, right? But no, he's not the one. So who is it? Maybe it's the mob. No, the mob is not the one. Then who is it? Maybe like who is it? Is it the jealous uh, uh, boyfriend who cheats right in front of her, or is it someone? So David Lynch is going through all of these different solutions, but in the end, it's like she dies on her own, right? It's revealed that she dies like she that main character who is
It's her
who is
life.
coming
Yeah.
up with all of these conspiracies in her mind.
Yeah.
That is the casting couch that did this. No, it's the mob that did this. No, it's that did this. Harvey, whatever. But at the end of the day, at the end of the movie, like she shoots herself.
Yeah.
She blows her own brains out and then she dies. So what happens when a society can't pinpoint the exact scapegoat, right? What happens to that? Right? They end up eating themselves up. They end up creating schisms amongst themselves. They end up fighting with one another. That's why after the Cold War, the main enemy is like now the CIA, right? Like that's the narrative of the 90s, the X-Files and all of these different movies. The main enemy is the conspiring government, right? So the enemy other is from always
Yeah.
more and
I
more
think.
internalized.
Yeah, I think the reason why those Eastern religions and things end up situating the final existence as non-existence is because they don't have a way of resolving how to maintain society once you get rid of the scapegoat, because once you get
Yes.
rid of the scapegoat, you're left with undifferentiation, which is non-existence ultimately. Because once you lose your sense of self completely, you don't have any sense of self. If you have no sense of self, you're non-existent at that point. You become a monstrous, unanimous, undifferentiated blob of sameness, right? Which is ultimately death, because that ends up being literal, unstable, chaotic states of existence that would lend itself to the extinction of your community, right? To the wiping out of your existence. So without the elevation of the human person with the Christian story, you don't have any path to get out of that in a way that doesn't lead into annihilation of the self and annihilation of your community ultimately. Because again, without being able to redeem desire, which in some ways, there's some of that. There's a lot of that in the Lynch stories. There's a lot of redemption, of doing good things and loving your neighbor. I mean, Laura Palmer is giving food to the elderly and helping people and doing good things, and David Lynch's story seems to want to celebrate the wholesomeness, but he's irritated at the fact, I guess, that people don't want the wholesomeness. They want the violence. They want the scandal, and they want to be able to discharge that scandal onto somebody else, which is a way of discharging their own sins onto somebody else. But that's why the Christ is so important, right? Because Christ gives us a vehicle to solve that problem, right? That we don't leave it with an open-ended question as to who's guilty. No, we understand that the human person is guilty, but the human person is also victimized. And that paradox is what the Christ reveals, right? That the human beings have the potential to be both victims and victimizers. And that it's our agency that's unleashed with that awareness that allows us to be able to go and create a society that will not continue to persist in that cycle of violence and blaming.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
All right. Well, I appreciate your time. Any last thoughts here before we wrap up?
Well, it's been fun discussing this with you. I hope we can do it again.
All right. Sounds good. Take care. Thanks for coming on. And we'll continue to unpack some more film and art pieces and dive into some other ideas in the future. You can email us hello@aneighborschoice.com. I'm David Gornoski. Godspeed.